Hey everyone, welcome to the program, WRSA Radio. I'm your host, G1. As always, I hope you are having a good week. It's been another dull one for me as I navigate the uncertain future. I want to thank everyone who wished me well. I really do appreciate that. I think everything will be okay. I'm optimistic about what things, how things will go. So I'm not letting it necessarily get me down, but it does. The uncertainty is the thing that weighs on you, and so you have to kind of put those things aside and say, well, I'm just gonna, these are the courses of action that I'm gonna take. I'm gonna do these things and build myself a schedule and kind of stick to those things. Maybe check out all my options, and I think everything will work out. So I'm not particularly concerned about it at this point. I think it's a little too early. But anyway, let's get into the show today because I want to hit on this. I'm currently facing outsourcing of my role to a third-party company. Now, I, of course, am not the first one and not the last one to deal with this, and I'm sure that some of you have possibly already faced this in your own lives. I've faced it before. I've seen this at my own company with my team. I've seen it with other teams at my company and other jobs, other positions that people have there. And there's always this fight to keep your work local as this obsession with lowering labor costs just hammers away at us. I find it very exhausting at all levels. When you have a workforce and you have a group of people who they're trying to focus on what they do, but they're also in the back of their minds constantly worried about, any mess up, any problem that arises, any reason that they give higher level management to replace them. It causes more problems than it fixes. People would rather have some security in knowing that, hey, my future is somewhat solid and somewhat consistent, and not have to be constantly looking over their shoulders for somebody that might come take their place. But like I said, it's very exhausting. If you put some thought into this, it's symptomatic of larger trends and problems that we have in the country. Let's go back in history and look at this kind of as it happened on a wider scale and how that has been a part of this bigger decline from what America once was. Go back to 1980. For example, from that point forward, I think we can use that as a good benchmark for when this really took off. Although I'm sure you could find some examples of it happening before that, but the 1980s, 80 and forward, that was really the decade of this movement of our industrial base offshore. You had mills and plants close all over the country, and the rural areas were really the ones that were hit really the hardest by all this. But there were cities that had previously been the center of a particular industry, and they were wiped out. Steel industry, automotive industry, whatnot. Detroit being the prime example of that. And even back in the 80s when, if you remember the movie Robocop, one of the jokes, the themes in that movie was the talk about how Detroit was in ruins and it would be replaced by this new city that was corporately ran in that movie. Funny little bit there, But how prescient it was. We enter the 1990s, and as a student, I vividly recall being told that, getting into middle class blue collar jobs was a dead end. Don't try to go into those manufacturing type jobs. Those aren't going to be there. Those jobs are all going overseas, and I should be focusing on an office job. Computers are where it's at. I recall Bill Clinton telling us all that the U.S. economy was transforming. We were no longer going to be an industrial economy. That was going away with the fall of the Soviet Union, and we were entering the global economy, the age of globalism. The U.S. was transferring and transforming into a service economy. So you go to school and you prepare and you go into work in a service economy. And 30 years later, every company in the West is transferring those service jobs overseas. So if we're not an industrial country, and now, although no politician is apparently brave enough to stand up and and tell everyone that we're no longer a service country. We're not. So what the hell are we? What is the future of our workforce? What is everyone going to do? We can't all be TikTok stars. The corporate drive is to cut costs, which pushes them to send work overseas, to have it done by people who will work for far less compensation than what we expect here in the U.S. Well, this math only works if the people here transfer to new jobs that continue to make enough money that they can afford to buy the products that you're making overseas. It all breaks down when we're all broke and we can't buy anything because none of us are working. We don't have a job that's all AI or whatever. Especially when you get what you pay for. You're running right alongside this movement of jobs overseas, and a steep, a decline in work available to us is a steep decline in quality. Quality of physical goods and now quality of service. Yes, you are getting workers in India that will work in that call center for pennies on the dollar, but every time a customer calls in, they are faced with a huge language barrier. And this leads to miscommunication. No understanding of what the customer is actually trying to get. No real resolution of the problem. So ultimately, the customer is not getting what they need, or perhaps what they were trying to pay for. While that might serve some scheme of a nefarious company or a dishonest company, if it has to put something in place to frustrate their customers' efforts to, well, maybe get warranty work or replacements or something like that, the company already has your money. They can put those kinds of things in place. But it's a death sentence for companies that are trying to actually sell services or products using a remote provider like that, a foreign call center or a third-party foreign service provider. It means you're not selling anything. You're ruining your reputation and you're crashing your business for a quick bottom line reduction in costs. That's one of the major factors driving this whole movement here, is this reduction in labor costs. What I've seen over the past 2 to 3 years is that the inflation of goods and services costs hasn't recovered. In spite of what Bidenomics says, that ain't happening. It's not just hitting your grocery store shelf. Try buying goods and services to supply your business. There's been a slow decline in costs, but it didn't mirror the sharp spike in costs during COVID. We are well behind that curve. And since you can't claw back those savings in many suppliers, what you're faced with is forces driving you to cut costs somewhere else. And ultimately that leads to labor, and the only way to do that is to get rid of people. People who are in high-paying positions are facing layoffs, and this outsourcing factor continues to wreak havoc. We're gutting our society. The drive to make the short-term dollar is destroying long-term survivability. I think many companies are cutting the limb that they're sitting on the tree. I don't think there's an end to this because I think it's madness. I think it's symptomatic to the larger problem that we have. The efforts to replace the culture in the West have infected every aspect of the top-end leadership of society. I think there's a belief that this process, a belief among them, that this process can continue infinitely, and that importing more people from countries that have traditionally been the locations where work was outsourced to, that will translate into the idea that those people coming here will have low expectations. They won't have any loyalty to anything. And therefore they will work like mercenaries. They'll take whatever they're offered, and then they'll move on from the job as soon as possible, as soon as someone else offers them a little more money. And this means that the companies will have a constant churn of low-paid employees, and they'll never have to deal with rising costs of insurance or paid vacations, paid leave, or FMLA. They won't have to deal with that because the employee won't be there long enough to earn those things. This is why you see the groups that are traditionally on the right in business, those are seen as traditional conservative type groups, the Chamber of Commerce types, they're the ones that are supporting these efforts. They want a low expectation workforce. They don't want to deal with the children that they created in the workplace. And all of this, of course, feeds into and expands the replacement. We went from outsourcing our jobs to outsourcing our culture and outsourcing our society. These people have undermined the foundations of a functioning nation in order to make a short-term dollar. At the same time, that dollar buys them less and less as they make efforts to prop up this floundering economy, and the inflation, cost-cutting death spiral continues. Rest assured, however, that there is a bottom to all this. There is an end to this. We will hit the floor at some point. Now, it's going to be like a drunk college girl on Friday night hitting the floor, but it will happen. And we just have to be ready to fend off the vultures that are standing around to take advantage of it. I think we'll start getting into some of those things in the shows coming up, because I'm not sure I can continue to beat the dead horse of how bad things really are. It's that meme of, remember how I told you things were bad? Well, it's gonna get a lot worse. So maybe we'll go into some of the things that we can do to prepare a little better for what is coming in the episodes coming up. So we'll get into those when we get there. Well, that is all that I got time for today. I'm sorry for the short episode this week, but things press in. Life happens. So anyway, like and subscribe. Come see us over on Gab, Nice Crew, and the Temporary Mothership, and I will see you guys on the next episode.